Hey guys. Okay, we finished up the last lecture with the US joining the war. And the US quickly realized this was going to have to be a total war. Maybe you guys remember, maybe you don't. We talked about total war with World War I. Total war is when the government decides the entire economy of the nation is going to focus on nothing but war. So they took factories, I don't know, let's say a refrigerator factory, a factory that makes refrigerators. And the government said, no more refrigerators. Now you make tanks. How about I don't know, a microwave factory, a factory that makes microwaves. They said, you don't make microwaves anymore. Now you make guns. And they took the entire economy of the United States of America and focused everything on this war. They also did these things called war bonds. That's it. A war bond is when private citizens lent money to the government. And the government said, after the war, we'll pay you back with interest. So let's say me, private citizen, I went to my government, really you did it through the bank. So I went to the bank and I gave the bank $10. And I said, I want to buy a war bond. After the government told me that after the war, they would give me back $12. That's how it worked. It was paid back with interest. And so just private citizens, anyone, your mom, well, you guys aren't American, just pretend like it's happening wherever your parents are from. Your mom, your dad, your grandma, your uncle, you could go to the bank and sign up for a war bond. And anyone that bought a war bond, that money went directly into the government fund to fight the war. And they were really, really popular during World War II, war bonds. And so prices were super regulated for everything. So the government could keep as much money as they could. And one kind of if you can see a positive side of World War, one positive thing that happened was there's so much production happening now that the Great Depression was over. Because all those poor people, all the people without jobs, they could all go and work in factories now to help the war effort. That's what they called it. They said the war effort. So people could get jobs helping the US win the war. There were, but during the war, citizens' rights were limited, the press was censored, there was propaganda everywhere. Like everywhere you looked, there were propaganda posters on the walls. If you went to the movies, you know, when you go to a movie and they play like a commercial before the movie, well, it used to be a little bit different. They didn't really play commercials for other movies before the movie. They played a little news section, or they played a little movie before the movie. And at this time, they were all propaganda, war, pro-US, yay, make everybody love their government videos. And here's a sad part. People of Japanese descent were treated very badly. Because why? Because the United States is at war with Japan. And so anyone that was genetically Japanese in the United States was treated very, very badly. They would be fired from their jobs, kicked out of their apartment. Some of them were even locked up in detention centers. They weren't concentration camps. They weren't work camps like the Nazis had, but the US government really did take Japanese people that had been living there, even if they had been there for generations and generations and generations. Their great grandpa came to the US, and every generation since then had been US citizens. If they looked Japanese, then they were literally locked in these detention centers. They were like jails, and they were put there and they had to live there because the US government didn't trust them. They thought Japanese people were all going to be spies working for the Japanese government. They were out to destroy America. And they were called, I keep saying detention, they were called internment camps. You know what? Give me just a second and I will find a picture for you. Internment camps, Japanese, United States. Here we are. Here's a good picture. So they just had these gigantic fenced in places where they made the Japanese people live and here in like dorms. And these could have been, I mean, it was anyone. It could have been like really, really rich, wealthy Japanese, of Japanese descent, people living in the States. They just took them out of their homes and forced them to live in these internment camps. And here we are. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry living in the following area. And this list will tell them what they can do and what they can't do. Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood. Here's a grocery store with someone with a sign saying, I am an American. Here's what the inside looked like. This is how they would have, this looks like the back of a truck. This is probably a Japanese family being, yes, it even says there, being sent to an internment camp. And they were just forced to live there throughout the war. Okay. So similar to World War I, in World War II, all the men, like young, healthy men, mostly between the ages of 18 and 35, were off to war. And so who was it that took those jobs? Women. Women took over those jobs. And in the United States, once again, there was a large propaganda. There was a propaganda campaign to make women go out. Rosie the Riveter. This is Rosie the Riveter. We can do it. And it was all about women. It was encouraging women to go out and help the American government win the war. And it was women, go out and get a job. We can do it. Women, go work, get a job in the factory. And these posters were all over the place, and it was encouraging. Well, I keep saying it over and over again, but it was Rosie the Riveter Rosie, read right here, Rosie the Riveter was all about, it was a propaganda campaign to get women to go out and help with the war effort. Now in, hold on, I've lost my place in my notes. So some women, Rosie the Riveter was in the US. If we're back in Europe, lots of women were actually fighting in the resistance. What is the resistance once again? If this is France, you know, France has been taken over. This is Nazi France. But the people that are living inside France that are against the Nazis were rising up and fighting against them. They were blowing up restaurants that Nazi soldiers liked to go to. They were coordinating together to fight inside France. But they weren't actually soldiers. They were private citizens, just like you or me. Those are resistance fighters. And I only used France as an example. There were resistance fighters in all these countries that had been overrun. And in Europe, lots of those resistance fighters were women. They would do super cool things, like resistance fighter women would strike up a friendly kind of romance with a Nazi soldier and fool the soldier into thinking that she was his girlfriend and get him to trust her. And then, of course, you know, people tell their boyfriend and their girlfriend things that they don't necessarily tell everyone else. And so she would get all this inside information about what the Nazis had planned. And then she could go back to all of her resistance fighters and tell them all what happened or what the Nazis were planning. These resistance women, they were awesome. And then for the Soviet Union, what was it that Stalin, what did Stalin say about women? Anything a man could do, a woman could do too. So for the Soviet Union, there were women that were actually in battle. There were female soldiers out fighting the war, female soldiers flying bomber planes. In the US and most of Western Europe, they didn't let women do stuff like that. Women could work in factories. There were some women nurses. There were some women like ambulance drivers, but they didn't let women fly bomber airplanes. They didn't let women carry guns and actually go into battle, but the Soviet Union did. And okay, 1942 to, first off, I gotta show you a map. At the beginning of the war, Japan, here's Japan right here. Japan had taken over all this area, like Manchuria is up here. Let me just draw on here. So Manchuria is up here. And Japan had taken over Manchuria, a whole bunch of Eastern China, a whole bunch of Southeast Asia, bunch of these islands. I'm circling them all. Japan didn't really conquer all these islands, but a whole bunch of them. Let me zoom in a little so you can, to mess up my, go back. Okay, there are a whole bunch of islands. And Japan really did take over many, many of them. And these islands over here took over a whole bunch of them. And just like Italy and Germany had taken over most of Western Europe, Japan had taken over most of this whole area. But then Sorry, I have to erase this. Let's get that all gone. Okay. But then between 1942 and 1943 is a big turning point in the war. A big turning point. Japan lost 2 huge battles. And those battles were the Battle of Midway and the Coral Sea Battle. Could also be the Battle of Coral Sea, either way. Let me show you. Here's the Coral Sea here. So they had taken over all these islands. We're right by Australia. So Japan lost a really big battle in here. And let's see, the Battle of Midway. Yes. And a big battle right here. Here's Hawaii. Okay, I'm just going to take a second and show you guys the map, because I don't really know how often you look at a world map. So here's Japan, and usually I move the map this way to look at Europe, and then I move the map this way to look at the US. But let's look at it the other way. Here's Japan right here. Here's Hawaii, and here's the United States. This is where Japan bombed. So anyway, this red point here, this is the Battle of Midway and the Battle of the Coral Sea. They lost 2 really big battles there. And while it looks tiny to you and the ocean in the middle of nowhere, there are a whole bunch of little islands in there that Japan had conquered. And it was really serious for them. It was bad. It made Japan look bad. So after the US had joined the US, after the US had joined World War II, joined the Allies, the big 3, these are the big 3 allied countries. So, you know, the big 3, those were England, or Britain, really. Britain, US, and the USSR. That's the Soviet Union. So we've got Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Stalin. These guys would periodically meet with each other to talk about their plans. But the meetings were always really tense because they didn't really like each other. They had a mutual enemy, but Churchill and FDR, they liked each other, but these 2 didn't like Stalin, and Stalin didn't like them. So the big problem was Britain and the United States thought Stalin wanted to take over the world with his communism. Stalin thought Britain and the United States wanted to completely destroy communism. And so they just couldn't ever trust each other. Even they were all completely against the Nazis. They were against Japan, they were against Italy, they were against Germany. So they could unify on their mutual hatred of the Nazis. But it didn't really make them like each other. And they would have these meetings, but they were tense, awkward meetings. In 1943, Stalin insisted that if he were going to help Churchill and Roosevelt to win this war, that he got to keep his part of Poland. Remember the map? Let's see if I can go. Here we are. Remember back when Hitler and Stalin did their pact, their non-aggression pact, and Germany took half of Poland and the Soviet Union took half of Poland. So this line right down through here, all of this side of Poland belongs to the Soviet Union. Well, Stalin told Churchill and Roosevelt, you're going to have to let me keep that part of Poland if you want my help. So they agreed. They weren't really happy about it, nor was Poland's government in exile. What is a government in exile? When they were conquered, the real elected leaders of Poland, they all fled Poland and went to live somewhere else and maintained the Polish government in exile. So they were really unhappy about this. Roosevelt and Churchill were unhappy about it, but they needed Stalin's help. So they caved and said, okay. Stalin really wanted Britain and the US to open up a second front, because right now, all of the fighting on the ground, not all of it, most of the real fighting on the ground is over here. And Stalin is just being bombarded by the Nazi troops and the fascist troops. I mean, Nazis are fascist. I'm just separating those so you hear Italian troops and German troops. All the fighting is going on over here. And Stalin is asking, please, will you open up a front over here so Germany has to split up and Italy has to split up their soldiers so my army isn't having to attack, take the full-on brunt. And Churchill and Roosevelt told him, we can't really do that right now. We don't have enough soldiers. We don't have enough guns. We don't have enough tanks. In 1942, I understand I'm going back and forth on the years. It's really hard to tell this story in a succinct order. In 1942, let me go down here to Africa. Okay, if you remember, the Italians had come down and invaded. The British pushed them back. Mussolini asked Hitler for help, and Hitler sent the Desert Fox down, and they pushed the British back, and they were all here in Cairo. And so the fascists had Libya and Egypt. Well, in 1942, finally, the Brits and people helping them from the Allies pushed the Germans and the Italians back once again, had them up here trapped in Tunisia, and then an American commander named Dwight Eisenhower, I'm going to write that name down for you in just a minute. Dwight Eisenhower led a group of Americans and British soldiers here into Morocco and Algeria, and they were fighting with the Germans and the Italians here. So you've got Allies pushing, the Axis powers are here. You've got Germany and Italy here. And you've got Allied soldiers pushing here, Allied soldiers pushing here, and they have soldiers attacking them from every side. And finally, in 1943, the Germans surrendered. They surrendered this northern part of Africa because they realized they were not going to win. So now that the Allied forces have all this part of the Mediterranean Sea free, they go up. This is Allied soldiers go up into Sicily, this island right here, this bottom part of Italy. This is the island of Sicily. They go up into Sicily and they fight and they liberate it. To liberate means to free. They liberated it from the fascist. And then they went up, 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 up. And as they're going up, resistance fighters inside Italy overthrew Mussolini. But the fighting didn't end. Even though Mussolini was gone, Hitler from up here, this is Germany here, Hitler sent soldiers down to Italy to help the Italian soldiers that had been fighting to fight off the Allied that were coming up. He also rescued Mussolini. Hitler sent soldiers to rescue Mussolini from the resistance fighters. Overall, this was really, really good for the Allied forces because it's making Germany break up their army and making them fight all over the place. So instead of having one unified army, one unified military fighting in one place, they were having to break up and they were having to send some soldiers here and some soldiers there and some soldiers there. And so it was making them weaker. Now, and I'm gonna flash back yet again. Do you remember in 1941 when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union? I'm going to talk about one of those battles there. So do you remember what stopped them? Yes, the winter. Just like Napoleon in 1812, Hitler's army was stopped due to the deadly winter. Now that's as they were going north. As they were going north, Hitler finally realized they weren't going to make it. So he turned his entire army to go south. He turned them down south and they went to Stalingrad. It's a city it was a city in the Soviet Union, Stalingrad, named after Stalin. And Hitler, who, Hitler is all into symbology. Remember the train car? Well, now he is determined to destroy Stalingrad because it's Stalin's, this city is named after Stalin. It would be a great symbol for him, for the Nazis to destroy Stalingrad. But Stalin, of course, was thinking the complete opposite. No, that's my city named after me. It's named after me. I will not let those Nazis take Stalingrad. So what happened was, let's say here's the city of Stalingrad. And the Germans, the Nazis, came and completely surrounded the entire city of Stalingrad. And they attacked. And it was really bad. They were attacking. Then, and it went on for a really, really long time, like a long time, like months and months and months and months and months and months and months. Well, Stalin decided that he absolutely was not going to lose Stalingrad. Stalin then sent thousands of troops to Stalingrad, and his soldiers surrounded the whole city like this outside the Germans. Remember, the blue line is the Germans that had surrounded the city. Well, now the Red Army, that's the Communist Army, Stalin's army, the Reds have completely surrounded. They've made yet another circle outside the Germans, and now they're out here, and now they're attacking the Nazis like this. And in January of 1943, the Germans surrender. They're completely surrounded. They're outnumbered. They finally gave up. This was called the Battle of Stalingrad. And it was really, really bad for Hitler. This one battle right here was extremely, extremely expensive. This was the costliest battle of the entire war. In all of World War II, the most soldiers, the most tanks, the most guns, the most everything was just lost. Because, let me draw with my blue, the Germans, all these Germans in here, they just had to abandon their tanks. They had to abandon everything. When they surrendered, it was done for. And this was a really, really seriously bad thing for Hitler and his Nazi army. After that, the Allies are finally prepared to do what Stalin has wanted them to do the whole time, which is to open up a Western front. And so they did that. And they started a massive airstrike campaign against Germany. An airstrike campaign that's sending lots of bombers over to drop bombs. And they dropped bombs all over Germany. They mostly focused on airports and factories, but they also hit schools and homes. They were just trying to destroy Germany. June 6th, 1944 is D-Day. This is one of the most important dates in modern world history. D-Day, June 6th, 1944, D-Day. Let me open up a map. Let me erase all of this so we can start over. Okay. All right, here we are in Europe. Let me make that a little bigger. Maybe a little bit bigger still. No, not that big. Okay. All right. So, thousands and thousands and thousands of US and British troops were hanging out here in Britain. They were taken in boats across the English Channel. This piece of water right here, this is called the English Channel. I'll write it up. Oh. The English Channel. A channel is like a piece of water that goes like this in between two large pieces of land, because that's not a river, because this is sea and this is sea, so it's a channel. They went from England across here, and they went to right here. This beach here is called Normandy Beach. This part of France is called Normandy. And so this is Normandy Beach. And they ran directly into oncoming fire on guns. There were like thousands and thousands and thousands of Nazi soldiers here, right? Here, there were thousands of Nazi soldiers. And the ships came over this way. The soldiers got out and had to run straight at the people firing at them. In that one morning, June 6, 1944, D-Day, 4,000 soldiers died. Another 9,000 were either injured or missing. Like, just nobody knows what happened to them in one morning. That's only for the Allies. For the Axis powers, for Germany, the numbers were about the same. So that's really 8,000 people, 8,000 soldiers killed in one morning, in just a couple hours. And if we're counting injured also, we're talking almost 30,000 people dead in just a couple hours in one morning on June 6th, 1944. It's called D-Day. But they did manage, the Allied forces did manage to break through. They got through the line, through the German line, and they came all the way to Paris, and they liberated France. While this was happening, while this battle was happening here, resistance fighters were rising up en force, en masse. Large amounts of resistance fighters were rising up in France and fighting against the Nazi soldiers. So you've got professional soldiers coming through this way, people just like me that are fighting against the Nazis all over France. And within a month, it took a month, within 1 month, Allied soldiers had liberated France. So now France is part of the Allies again. It was a huge hit against Germany. All this time, this month, the Allies are still bombing Germany, like all the time, all day, every day, bombs dropping on Germany. And then they did this thing where the Allies, do you remember when Germany was trying to destroy London? What was that called? The Blitzkrieg, 57 days, yes. Well, the Allies did the same thing to Germany, and they picked just kind of famous cities in Germany. And so they did that to Hamburg is a famous German city, and in 10 days, the Allies destroyed Hamburg. 40,000 civilians dead in 10 days. Civilians, that's people like you and me, people that are not in the army is a civilian. If you're not in the army, you are a civilian. In 10 days, 40,000 of them were dead. Over 1 million people fled, which means they ran away to try to get away from the bombs. Then in February, we've moved forward quite a bit in time. February 1945, the Allies bombed Dresden. Dresden, it was a German city, and it was said to be one of the most beautiful cities in all of Europe. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful city. Well, because it was so famous for its beauty, what do you think the Allies did? Bombed it. And 135,000 civilians dead. This is war. I mean, in modern history now, of course, if we're saying, well, who were the good guys and who were the bad guys in the war? We always say the Allies were the good guys and the Axis were the bad guys, because the Axis had Nazis and Hitler, and they were killing people in their concentration camps, and the Allies were the good guys coming to help. I just need you to understand that in war, like, war is bad. If we're talking good guys, bad guys, then the good guys were dropping bombs on a random city for 10 days and killed 40,000 innocent people. They bombed another city and killed 135,000 people in one bombing campaign. So you can say good guys, bad guys in a war, but even the good guys do some really, really bad things in the name of war. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes to see what I want to do. Okay. The Soviet Union. Oh man, I have to erase all this stuff. I thought I had it erased. I don't want to confuse you. So got to get rid of all this. Okay. The Soviet Union has now broken through this line. You know, their line is here. This is the Soviet Union over here. They have broken through this line, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and they've gotten all the way into Eastern Germany. At this time, Hitler's support inside Germany is failing. That means actual German people are turning on Hitler. They don't really like him anymore. They're not so much supporting him. His actual followers, they're kind of crumbling away. By I know what I can do. By early 1945, the map has changed, and all of this All of this is now Allied land. And the Allies are starting to crush in on Germany. And it's looking like Germany is going to fail. That's by like early 1945. So early, we're talking like January, February. By January, February 1945, the Allied forces are starting to crush in on the Axis powers, and it's looking really, really good for the Allies. In February of 1945, the big three, who were the big three? Yes, Churchill, Delano Roosevelt, and Stalin. The big three met in Yalta in the Soviet Union. They had a meeting, and they were meeting about what are we going to do? How are we going to win this war? Stalin insisted that he keep control of all the places that he had liberated in Eastern Europe. And he wanted to keep them as like a buffer zone, a protection zone from invasions in the future. Churchill and Roosevelt, once again, really didn't like that idea, but they needed Stalin's help. So they were like, okay. The three leaders agreed to go to war against Japan together, but they said they have to win the war in Europe. They have to win the war in Europe first. Once they've won the war in Europe, 90 days later, Stalin would join the war against Japan. Because as of now, Stalin is only fighting the Germans and the Italians. Stalin doesn't actually have any official problem with the Japanese. But Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin all agreed that after the three of them had completely conquered, liberated, won all of Europe, that the three of them together would focus on Japan. And they agreed that when they conquered Germany, Germany itself would be divided into 4 sections. What is wrong with me? Why can't I? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. And Stalin is going to control one part. The French are going to control one part. The US is going to control one part. And Britain is going to control one part. All of this is Germany. So the three of them got together and decided that when they conquered Germany, they were going to break it up like this. Okay. Stalin, there was one more agreement that Stalin made. Stalin agreed to let the Eastern European countries that he had liberated, to have free elections. Because let me go into the map and make sure you understand. I gotta erase all this. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so I'm so sorry. Okay. All right, so as Stalin, a bunch of these countries over here had been taken over by the Nazis, the Balkans. And, you know, Poland, kind of really, if we were to draw a line like this, this is where Stalin had now liberated these countries from the Nazis, but he wanted to keep control of them. And he agreed that he was going to let them have free elections and they were going to get to rule themselves. That was a big part of him agreeing to jump in the war and fight Japan. All right, we're done. You guys have a good one. Oh, I can't get this to close. Here we are.